Now, Richard, a question that I have is, what do we do when there seems to be a tension or conflict between something we read in the Bible and then when we try and live that out in real life?
Yeah, like when orthodoxy and orthopraxis and orthopathos conflict with each other, or seem to. Yeah, because they do. And this is one of the realities of that web of multiple reciprocities, is that things don't always just jive with each other. They often create tensions. I mean, if you start valuing the way you feel about certain things, then there are going to be things in the Bible that are said that are not going to make you feel quite at home or safe or identified with these things or sympathetic toward these truths. I mean, let's just face it, when we read about the holy wars of Israel, I hope that very few of us sort of naturally feel like, well, that's a great idea. Let's just kill everybody. I mean, it should create a sense of disconnect or dissonance. Okay? Or take another example, when the Bible tells us that in Revelation 6, for example, that Jesus won't return until the full number of martyrs has been completed. Okay, now, and then somebody stands up and says, all right, now that means you need to be a martyr. You need to practice that, orthopraxis, endanger yourself. Well, you know, that's going to be a difficult thing for many people to do. So there are tensions here. And the reality is sometimes the tensions that we feel are clues. They're like caution lights coming on in the traffic light. They're clues that maybe we haven't understood the doctrine correctly. Okay, that's one good thing about orthopraxis and orthopathos, that you try to practice a teaching and you see it's not working. And sometimes the failure in practice can be a caution light that comes on and says, well, maybe I didn't quite understand it. I can think of an example in my own life when I was a very young Christian. I thought that if I just believed hard enough that a poison oak infection I had on my face, if I just believed hard enough that it would go away, that it would. And so I can honestly tell you, sitting right here, that I believed with all of my heart that it would go away, and that I told the Lord, I said, I'm going to spin around, and when I look back in this mirror, it's going to be gone. Because that's what I've been taught. Okay? As a very young Christian, I've been taught, if you just believe it, it will happen. Okay? So act on it. Take a step of faith. Orthopraxis. And so I spun around in front of that mirror and opened my eyes, and it was still there. And what that experience of orthopraxis, the attempt at orthopraxis, did was not show that the Bible was wrong. The light came on. Maybe I didn't understand the Bible correctly. Maybe my teachers were not telling me the right thing when they told me if I just believed hard enough that the Bible taught that if I just believed hard enough, it would be done, okay? And so sometimes those tensions alert us to the fact that we are not understanding the Bible correctly. And so we go back to the orthodoxy and work at it harder. Other times, however, orthopraxis and orthopathos, and this would be especially true in Western culture, where Christianity is relatively easy. Sometimes we feel tension simply because we're not willing to accept the truth. The truth of the Bible is hard. I mean, when Jesus tells us, for example, that you save your life by losing it, we basically, in Western Christianity, we don't know what that means. We don't have a clue what that means. And so it's very hard for us even to conceive of a practice that would lead us into risking our safety, risking our prosperity, those kinds of things for the sake of the gospel, even though clearly that is what the passage is teaching. Is that Jesus is saying, if you try to secure your life in this world, if you try to make everything just right and safe and wholesome and good, then you're actually going to end up losing the faith. And so risking is something that is hard to do, but at the same time, we understand the Bible correctly and we must work hard at it, even if it's uncomfortable. And feeling is the same thing, because we all have this notion, especially again in modern Western Christianity, that if you're thinking the right thoughts and you're believing the right things, then God wants good for you, and that means you're going to be a happy person. In fact, the largest churches in my own country are just filled with pastors that go around telling people all the time that Jesus wants them to feel better. Jesus just wants them happy, and that's the goal of the Christian life. But it's not true. Jesus himself was not happy all the time, and yet he obeyed the Lord. Remember, he begged not to have to go to the cross. If there's any way possible, I don't want to have to do this. But instead of saying, well, now my feeling bad about this means I'm misunderstanding what God has told me to do, what he finally came to was, I've got to do it anyway. So sometimes the tension between these various things that we have going on of orthodoxy, orthopraxis, orthopathos brings up a caution light and says, maybe you're really not understanding it correctly. But other times it just says, it's just time to go on and do what God says, even if you don't feel like it, even if you don't see it working out easily.
So that kind of would help us with a situation like a lot of people feel the tension between God being good and in control of all things, and the fact that our world is really messed up. Mm-hmm. We see death and pain. How can we hold together a loving God in a messed up world?
Yes. So exactly, because that's an easy thing to hold so long as you don't know real suffering.
Yeah.
If you're not doing the orthopraxis of getting your hands dirty with real life in this world. And often that then creates other tensions, even inside of orthodoxy. How can I work this out? The orthopraxis of serving the poor, of helping the needy, and seeing their suffering can then move you back into orthodoxy and say, I've got to work on this a whole lot more. How can God be good and the world be like it is? And here's another frustrating thing. Okay, so God's called me to do something good in this world. But I've spent the last 15 years of my life in this place trying to do something good, and it's all falling to pieces. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that's something that pastors often have to face, is they work very hard in a church, they build that church up, then they go on, they're called to someplace else, and the next thing you know, the church they just left is falling to pieces. And so they look at it and say, then what sense does all this make? My orthopraxis did not comply with my orthodoxy, and it certainly isn't making me feel good. And so those tensions just keep moving us around, which is what we have to do. We have to keep moving around. And if we do, then we'll be able to see how these tensions can actually help us grow.